Willa Caldwell found the man bleeding in her barn an hour before the bank agent was due to foreclose on Crescent Ranch. She had come to check the latch on the back paddock gate, her mind tangled with numbers that would not add up, and prayers that had gone unanswered for 3 months. The stranger lay half hidden in the straw near the empty horse stall, his brown duster dark with blood along the left side, his breathing shallow and uneven. His hand rested on the grip of a revolver still holstered at his hip. His eyes opened when her shadow crossed his face, pale blue and sharp despite the pain tightening the corners of his mouth. She should have called for help. She should have run to the house and fetched her brother. Instead, she knelt in the straw and met his gaze with the steady calm she had learned from too many hard seasons. "Who shot you?" she asked. His voice came out rough and low. "Men who do not want me talking." He tried to sit up and hissed through his teeth, pressing one hand to his ribs. She saw the dark stain spreading and made a decision that would change everything. "I will get water and bandages. Do not move. Do not die in my barn. I have enough trouble without a body." His name was Micah Rollins, and he told her the truth because he had no choice. He had been a gambler, the kind who worked riverboats and mining camps, reading men better than cards. He had won a ranch deed in a poker game in Cheyenne 6 weeks ago, a game he later learned had been rigged by railroad men trying to clear land for a new spur line. The ranch was Crescent Ranch. Her ranch. He had come to Fox Hollow to return the deed and walk away clean. But the men who had framed him wanted the paper destroyed and him silent. They had caught him on the road 2 miles out and put a bullet through his side. Willa pressed a folded cloth against the wound and tried to keep her hands from shaking. "Why would you return it?" He met her eyes without flinching. "Because I do not steal from widows and children. Because I have done enough wrong in my life to know the difference." She felt something crack open inside her chest, something she had kept locked since her father died and the bank started circling. "You are lying. No one gives back a winning hand." He winced as she tied the bandage tighter. "I am not the man I used to be. Test me if you want. I brought the deed. It is in my coat pocket." She found the folded paper, brittle with age and stained along one edge. Her father's signature sat at the bottom in faded ink, transferred into the hands of a railroad holding company 3 months before his death. She had not known he had lost the ranch. She had not known until the banker arrived with foreclosure papers that her family had been living on borrowed time. Her throat tightened. This does not stop the foreclosure. The bank does not care who holds the deed. They care about the debt. Micah sat up slowly, one hand braced against the stall post. "Then we buy time. We prove the game was rigged and the transfer was fraud. We take this to a judge. We fight." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that a man who had spent his life taking could become a man who gave back. But trust was a currency she could not afford, and she had been burned too many times by smooth words and desperate promises. "I do not even know you." He nodded, his expression hard and honest. "No. But you know what it feels like when the world tries to take everything. So do I. That makes us allies, whether you like it or not." The bank agent arrived at sunset with a ledger and a cold smile. Willa met him at the porch steps, her apron still dusted with hay, her hands scrubbed, but her heart pounding. Micah stayed hidden in the barn, too weak to stand for long and too dangerous to reveal. The agent, a narrow man named Griffith, tapped his pen against the ledger and recited numbers she already knew by heart. Your payment is 60 days overdue, Miss Caldwell. The bank has been more than patient. She kept her voice level. I have a buyer interested in the north pasture. I can make a partial payment by the end of the week. Partial will not suffice. The property will be auctioned on the courthouse steps in 10 days, unless the full amount is paid. She felt the ground tilt beneath her. 10 days. That was not enough time to sell livestock, negotiate terms, or find a miracle. Griffith closed the ledger with a soft snap. I suggest you start packing. Good evening, Miss Caldwell. He turned and walked back to his horse, his shadow long and smug in the failing light. She stood on the porch until the sound of hoofbeats faded, then returned to the barn and found Micah on his feet, leaning against the stall gate with his jaw set. I heard. We have 10 days. She shook her head. We have nothing. You have a stolen deed and a bullet hole. I have a debt I cannot pay. He stepped closer, his voice low and fierce. Then we take the fight to them. We find the men who rigged that game. We prove fraud. We make them answer. She wanted to laugh at the impossibility of it, but the look in his eyes stopped her. He meant every word. You do not owe me this. He shook his head slowly. Maybe I owe it to myself. She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Instead, she brought him a plate of cold cornbread and beans, and they sat in the lantern light, planning a war neither of them knew how to win. The first break came from an unexpected place. Willa had a friend, a quiet woman named Margaret, who worked as a housekeeper for the railroad land office in town. Margaret had seen things, heard things, and kept her mouth shut, because silence kept her employed. But she owed Willa a favor from the winter her boy had taken sick, and Willa had paid for the doctor out of her own empty pockets. Margaret came to the ranch at dawn with a basket of laundry as her cover, and a whispered confession that changed everything. There is a man named Drummond. He works for the railroad. He has been buying up deeds through rigged card games for 2 years. Your father was not the only one. There are at least 6 others. The railroad wants a clear line from Fox Hollow to the mining district, and they do not care who they ruin to get it. Willa felt the rage rise hot and bright in her chest. Where is he now? Margaret glanced toward the barn where Micah stood half-hidden in shadow. In town. He stays at the Fox Hollow Hotel. He has 2 men with him, both armed. They do not hide what they are. Micah stepped forward, his expression hard. Then we go to town. We find him. We get proof. Willa turned on him, her voice sharp. You can barely stand. You want to walk into a hotel and confront a man who already tried to kill you. He met her eyes without blinking. Yes, because if we wait, he will come here. And next time, he will not miss. She knew he was right. She hated that he was right. Margaret left with her empty basket, and Willa faced the choice she had been avoiding since she found Micah bleeding in the hay. Trust him, or lose everything. She took a breath and made the leap. We go together, but we do it smart. We do not walk in like fools. We watch. We listen. We find leverage. Micah nodded slowly, something like respect crossing his face. You have done this before. She shook her head. No, but I have spent my whole life fighting men who think I am too weak to matter. I know how to make them underestimate me. They rode into Fox Hollow at midday, when the streets were full and witnesses were plentiful. Willa drove the wagon with Micah beside her, his duster buttoned to hide the bandages and his hat pulled low. The town felt smaller than she remembered. Every face familiar, and every gaze a potential judgment. She had grown up here, buried her father here, and watched her reputation fray with every missed payment, and every whispered word about the Caldwell girl who could not hold her family together. The church ladies watched from the general store steps. The banker nodded from across the street with a smile that did not reach his eyes. She felt Micah's presence beside her like a loaded gun, dangerous and necessary in equal measure. They left the wagon at the livery and walked toward the hotel, their steps careful and deliberate. Willa had pinned her braid into a neat coil and worn her Sunday shawl, the one without holes or stains. She wanted to look like a woman who belonged, not a woman who was desperate. Micah walked a half step behind her, his hand resting near his belt, but not on his gun. They looked like a couple conducting quiet business, unremarkable and easily forgotten. It was exactly what they needed. The Fox Hollow Hotel sat at the corner of Main Street, a 2-story building with a wide porch and lace curtains in the windows. Willa had never been inside. Women like her did not frequent hotels unless they were cleaning rooms or serving meals. She climbed the steps with her chin up and her heart hammering, and Micah followed without a word. The lobby smelled of tobacco and old wood polish. A clerk stood behind the desk, his eyes flicking over them with practiced disinterest. Willa smiled, soft and polite. "Good afternoon. I am looking for a Mr. Drummond. I believe he is a guest here." The clerk's expression shifted, just a flicker of caution. "Mr. Drummond does not receive visitors. If you have business, you can leave a message." Micah stepped forward, his voice low and even. "Tell him Micah Rollins is here. Tell him I brought what he has been looking for." The clerk hesitated, then nodded and disappeared up the stairs. Willa exhaled slowly, her pulse loud in her ears. "What are you doing?" Micah kept his eyes on the staircase, drawing him out. "He wants the deed. He wants me dead. Let him think he can have both." She wanted to argue, but footsteps sounded above and a door opened. A man descended the stairs, broad-shouldered and well-dressed, his vest expensive and his smile colder than winter iron. Behind him came 2 others, lean and hard-eyed, their hands resting on gun belts. Drummond stopped 3 steps from the bottom, his gaze settling on Micah with the slow pleasure of a man who has won. "Mr. Rollins, I thought you would be dead by now." Micah did not flinch. "I am harder to kill than you thought." Drummond's smile widened, clearly. "And you brought a friend. How charming." His eyes slid to Willa, assessing and dismissive in the same breath. "Miss Caldwell, I presume. I have heard much about you. All of it sad." She felt the insult land, but she held her ground. "You have been stealing land. You rigged card games and forged transfers. I have proof." Drummond laughed, a low, comfortable sound. "Proof? How delightful. And where, pray tell, is this proof?" Micah's hand moved toward his coat, and the 2 gunmen tensed. Willa felt the moment sharpen, the air turning brittle. Micah pulled out the folded deed, holding it up where Drummond could see. "This deed was won in a game you rigged. The transfer is fraud. If I take this to a judge, your railroad loses everything. Drummond descended the last steps, his expression unbothered. You could try. But judges are expensive, Mr. Rollins. Lawyers are expensive. Time is expensive. And you, I suspect, have none of those things. He glanced at Willa. Neither does Miss Caldwell. Her ranch will be auctioned in 9 days. Even if you file a suit, it will take months. The land will be gone long before your proof matters. Willa felt the trap close around them, but she refused to look away. Then we take this to the newspaper. We make it public. We let the whole territory know what you have done. Drummond's smile faded. That would be unwise. Accidents happen to people who make noise. Fires, falling timber, runaway horses. It would be a shame if something happened to that pretty ranch of yours before the auction. She felt Micah shift beside her, his tension coiling like a spring. Drummond leaned closer, his voice dropping. Give me the deed. Walk away. I will make sure the bank delays the foreclosure long enough for you to sell and leave quietly. You get to keep your dignity. Everyone wins. Micah's voice cut through the silence, cold and final. No. Drummond's expression hardened. Then you are both fools. He turned and climbed the stairs without another word. The two gunmen lingered, their eyes promising violence, then followed. Willa and Micah stood alone in the lobby, the clerk staring at them with pale, frightened eyes. They walked out into the bright afternoon, the street noise washing over them like a reprieve. Willa's hands were shaking. That went well. Micah's jaw was tight. He will come for us now. Tonight. Maybe sooner. She nodded. Then we move first. They found the newspaper office tucked between the barber and the land surveyor. A narrow building with ink-stained windows and a hand-painted sign that read Fox Hollow Gazette. The editor was a wiry man named Callahan, who had known Willa's father and owed him a debt that had never been repaid. He listened to their story with his arms crossed and his eyes sharp, and when they finished, he sat in silence for a long moment. This is dangerous. If I print this, Drummond will come after me too. Willa leaned forward, her voice steady. If you do not print it, he wins. More families lose their land. More people lose everything. You have a choice. Be part of the problem or part of the solution. Callahan looked at Micah. You have proof. Micah handed over the deed and a list of names Margaret had provided. 6 other families who had lost property in rigged games. Callahan studied the papers, then nodded slowly. I will run it in tomorrow's edition. Front page. But you need to stay alive long enough to see it. Drummond will not wait. Micah met his gaze. We know. Callahan stood and shook their hands, his grip firm. Your father was a good man, Miss Caldwell. He would be proud of you. Willa felt the sting of tears and blinked them away. Thank you. They left the office and headed back to the wagon, the weight of what they had set in motion pressing down like a storm about to break. They were halfway to the ranch when the riders appeared. 3 men on horseback, coming fast from the north, dust rising behind them like smoke. Micah saw them first and cursed under his breath. Hold on. He snapped the reins, and the wagon lurched forward, the horses breaking into a rough gallop. Willa grabbed the seat rail, her heart slamming in her chest. The riders closed the distance, their shouts carrying across the open ground. One of them fired a shot, the crack splitting the air. The bullet hit the wagon bed with a splintering thunk. Micah steered the wagon off the main road and onto a narrow trail that cut through a stand of cottonwoods, the branches whipping past as the wheels bounced over roots and stones. The trail opened onto a dry creek bed, and Micah hauled the horses to a stop behind a fallen tree trunk. His breathing hard. He jumped down and pulled his revolver, checking the cylinder. "Stay down." Willa climbed down beside him. Her jaw set. "I am not hiding while you get shot again." He looked at her, something raw and unguarded in his expression. "I do not want you hurt." She met his eyes. "Then do not get killed." The riders crashed through the trees, pulling up short when they saw the wagon. One of them called out, his voice mocking. "Rollins, you are making this harder than it has to be. Just give us the deed and the girl, and we will make it quick." Micah fired a shot over their heads, the crack echoing across the creek bed. "You want the deed, you come and take it." The riders split, circling wide, trying to flank them. Willa grabbed a loose board from the wagon bed, her mind racing. She saw the old fence post leaning against a rock nearby, an idea forming fast and desperate. She ran to the post, braced it against the ground, and shoved hard. The post toppled, rolling down the bank and startling the nearest horse. The animal reared, throwing its rider into the dirt. Micah fired again, clipping another man's shoulder. The third rider wheeled his horse and charged, his gun drawn. Willa threw the board, hitting the horse's flank. The animal swerved, dumping the rider into the creek bed in a tangle of limbs and cursing. Micah moved fast, disarming the downed men and tying their hands with rope from the wagon. The first rider tried to stand, and Micah put a boot on his chest. "Tell Drummond this is not over." The man spat blood and said nothing. Micah tied the last knot and climbed back onto the wagon, his face pale with pain but his eyes fierce. Willa followed, her hands shaking with adrenaline. They drove back to the ranch in silence, the sun sinking low and the shadows stretching long across the prairie. That night, they sat on the porch of the ranch house, the air cool and the stars sharp overhead. Willa's brother had taken the horses to the far pasture, giving them space and silence. Micah leaned against the railing, his hand pressed to his side where the bandages had soaked through again. Willa brought a fresh cloth and knelt beside him, her hand steady as she unwound the old wrapping. "You are bleeding again." He winced. "I have had worse." She did not look up. "That does not mean you should keep getting worse." He was quiet for a moment, watching her work. "Why are you helping me? You do not know me. You have no reason to trust me." She tied the new bandage and sat back on her heels, meeting his eyes in the dim lantern light. "Because you came back. Because you could have kept that deed and walked away rich, and you did not. Because I have spent 3 months drowning, and you are the first person who offered to fight instead of pity me." He reached out slowly, his hand brushing hers, the touch light and tentative. "I am not a good man, Willa. I have done things I am not proud of, things I cannot undo." She did not pull away. "None of us are saints, Micah. We are just people trying to do better than we did yesterday." His fingers closed around hers, and something shifted between them, fragile and fierce at the same time. The moment stretched, and then he leaned forward and kissed her, soft and careful, like he was asking a question he was afraid to hear answered. She kissed him back, her hand rising to his jaw. And for a brief, burning second, the world narrowed to just the two of them, and the wild, reckless hope that maybe they could win this fight together. When they pulled apart, his forehead rested against hers, his voice barely a whisper. "If we survive this, I want to stay. I want to help you rebuild. I want to be the man you think I can be." She closed her eyes, her heart aching and soaring in the same breath. Then, we survived. The newspaper hit the streets at dawn, and by noon the town was in an uproar. Callahan had printed everything: names, dates, the list of rigged games, and a bold headline that read "Railroad Land Fraud Exposed." Willa and Micah stayed at the ranch, waiting for the fallout. It came faster than expected. The sheriff arrived first, a tired man named Boone, who had known Willa's father and respected the truth more than convenience. He read the article twice, then looked at them with weary resignation. "This is going to bring trouble. Federal trouble. Railroad trouble. You two just made a lot of powerful people very angry." Micah nodded. "We know." Boone sighed. "I will do what I can to keep you safe, but I am one man. If Drummond sends more guns, I cannot stop them all." Willa stepped forward. "Then we need witnesses. We need the other families who lost land to come forward. We need proof that this is not just about us." Boone scratched his jaw. "That is easier said than done. People are scared." Micah's voice was hard. "Then we make them less scared. We show them Drummond can be beaten." Boone left with a warning to stay sharp and a promise to send word if trouble was coming. Willa and Micah spent the afternoon checking fences and loading rifles, preparing for the siege they both knew was inevitable. It came that night. 4 riders, armed and angry, torches in hand. They did not bother with subtlety. They rode straight up to the house, shouting threats and firing shots into the air. Willa and Micah met them from the porch, rifles raised. "Drummond sent you." The lead rider, a scarred man with a voice like gravel, spat into the dirt. "He sent us to deliver a message. Drop this, or we burn you out." Micah's voice was cold. "Tell Drummond to come himself if he wants a fight." The rider laughed. "He does not need to. We are enough." He tossed a torch onto the barn roof. The dry wood caught instantly, flames licking up into the night. Willa ran for the barn, her heart in her throat, but Micah caught her arm. "It is too late. Let it burn." She turned on him, tears streaking her face. "That barn is all I have left." He pulled her close, his voice fierce in her ear. "No. You have more. You have this fight. You have tomorrow. You have me. Let it go." She wanted to scream, but the heat was too intense and the riders were circling closer. They retreated into the house, barricading the door and watching through the windows as the barn collapsed in a roar of flame and sparks. The riders stayed until the fire burned low, then rode off into the darkness, their laughter echoing across the scorched ground. Willa sat on the floor, with her back against the wall, her face blank with shock. Micah sat beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "I am sorry." She shook her head slowly. "They wanted me to break. They wanted me to give up." He met her eyes. Did they win? She looked at the smoldering wreckage through the broken window, then back at him. "No. They just made me angrier." He smiled, grim and fierce. "Good. Because we are not done yet." The next morning, 3 families came to the ranch. They had read the article. They had lost land the same way. They were ready to fight. Willa stood in the ashes of her barn and felt something shift inside her. She was not alone anymore. The fight was bigger than her ranch, bigger than one deed, bigger than fear. It was about justice. It was about standing up when the world told you to fall. Micah stood beside her, and she felt the weight of his presence like an anchor in a storm. Together, they would finish this. The showdown came 5 days later at the courthouse steps. The auction was scheduled for noon, and the whole town turned out to watch. Drummond stood near the auctioneer, confident and untouchable, his 2 gunmen flanking him like guard dogs. The sheriff stood to one side, his hand resting on his belt, his eyes scanning the crowd. Willa and Micah arrived with the 3 families and a lawyer from the territorial capital, a sharp woman named Ellison, who had taken the case pro bono after reading Callahan's article. She carried a leather case full of documents, depositions, and a federal injunction halting the sale pending a fraud investigation. The auctioneer started his patter, but Ellison stepped forward and raised her voice. This auction is illegal. I have a federal court order halting all sales of property connected to the railroad land fraud case currently under investigation. The auctioneer faltered, looking to Drummond. Drummond's face darkened. That injunction has no standing here. Ellison smiled, cold and professional. It has standing everywhere, Mr. Drummond. And if you proceed, you will be charged with contempt of court. The crowd murmured, and the auctioneer set down his gavel. I cannot proceed under these circumstances. Drummond turned on Micah, his voice low and vicious. You think this changes anything? You think a piece of paper stops me? Micah stepped forward, his hand near his gun. No, but it buys time, and time is all we need. Drummond's gunman moved, and the sheriff drew his revolver. Enough. No one draws in my town. Drummond, you are done here. You can leave quietly, or I can arrest you right now for conspiracy and attempted murder. There are a dozen witnesses. Your choice. Drummond stared at the sheriff, then at Micah, his jaw tight with rage. This is not over. Micah's smile was hard and cold. Yes, it is. Drummond left Fox Hollow that afternoon, his men trailing behind him like whipped dogs. The federal investigation moved forward, and within 2 months the railroad's land acquisitions were voided. The families who had lost property received restitution. Crescent Ranch was returned to Willa free and clear, the debt erased as part of the settlement. The town threw a quiet celebration, and for the first time in years Willa felt like she could breathe. But the victory was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of something else, something harder to name and impossible to ignore. Micah stayed. He helped her rebuild the barn, hauling timber and driving nails until his hands were blistered and his back ached. He mended fences, broke horses, and worked the land like a man who had finally found a place worth staying for. The townsfolk watched with wary curiosity, but slowly, grudgingly, they accepted him. He was not the gambler anymore. He was the man who had stood beside Willa Caldwell and fought when it mattered. That counted for something. It counted for a lot. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the prairie gold, Willa and Micah stood on the porch of the new barn, their hands dusted with sawdust and their faces tired, but content. She looked at him. This man who had stumbled into her life bleeding and desperate, and had become something she had not known she needed. You could leave now. The fight is over. You are free. He shook his head, his eyes steady on hers. I do not want to be free. I want to be here. With you. If you will have me. She felt her throat tighten, the weight of the question settling over her like a vow. I will have you, on one condition. He smiled, wary and hopeful. What is that? She stepped closer, her hand finding his. You stay. Not because you owe me. Not because you feel guilty. You stay because you choose this. Because you choose me. He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. I choose you. Every day. For as long as you will let me. They were married in the spring, a quiet ceremony in the church with Margaret and Callahan as witnesses. Willa wore her mother's dress, altered to fit, and carried wildflowers picked from the north pasture. Micah wore a borrowed suit and looked uncomfortable and impossibly handsome all at once. The preacher spoke about redemption and second chances. And Willa thought about how far they had both come from the night she found him bleeding in the barn. She thought about trust earned through fire and fear. About love built not on ease, but on choosing each other, when the world tried to tear them apart. After the ceremony, they rode back to the ranch together, the wagon rattling over the familiar road. The land stretched wide and open before them, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Willa felt hope settle into her bones like sunlight. Micah glanced at her, his hand covering hers on the seat. Nervous. She shook her head. No. Relieved. He smiled. Me too. They reached the ranch as the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and amber. The house stood quiet and sturdy, the barn gleaming with fresh timber, the fences mended and strong. It was not perfect. It was not easy. But it was theirs, built together, from ashes and stubbornness, and the kind of love that refused to quit. That night, they sat together on the porch steps, watching the stars come out one by one. The air was cool and clear, and the prairies sang with the sound of crickets and distant wind. Micah leaned back on his elbows, his expression peaceful. I never thought I would have this. A home. A family. Someone who knows the worst of me and stays anyway. Willa rested her head on his shoulder. I never thought I would trust anyone enough to let them stay. He turned his head and kissed her hair, his voice low and steady. Then, we are both lucky. She smiled, her eyes on the endless sky. Yes, we are. The ranch thrived over the years that followed. They added cattle, repaired the irrigation channels, and expanded the house to make room for the children who came in time. Small, fierce creatures with their mother's stubbornness and their father's quiet strength. The railroad built its line, but it curved around Fox Hollow instead of through it, the fraud investigation forcing a new route that left the town intact. Drummond disappeared, rumors said to California, where he tried the same scheme and ended up in federal prison. Callahan kept printing the truth, and the families who had lost land rebuilt their lives with the restitution money. Willa and Micah worked side by side, their partnership forged in fire and tempered by time. They fought sometimes, sharp and fierce, because neither of them knew how to back down when it mattered. But they always came back to each other, always chose the hard work of staying over the easy escape of leaving. The town never forgot the fight they had waged, and the story became legend, told and retold until it was hard to say where truth ended and myth began. But the people who had been there knew the real story. They knew it was not about heroes or villains. It was about two people who had been broken by the world and had chosen to rebuild together, piece by piece, until something beautiful and unbreakable stood where ruins had been. On their 10th anniversary, Micah took Willa to the ridge above the ranch, the place where you could see the whole valley spread out below. They stood together in the fading light, his arm around her shoulders, her hand resting over his heart. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Staying, fighting, choosing this life." She looked at the land they had built together, the house and barn and fences, the horses grazing in the pasture, the smoke rising from the chimney where their children waited. She looked at the man beside her, the one who had come to her bleeding and desperate and had stayed to become her partner, her lover, her home. She shook her head. Never. Not once. He kissed her then, slow and deep, and the sun sank below the horizon, painting the world in gold and shadow. A promise kept and a future earned. The years rolled on, and the story of Willa Caldwell and Micah Rollins became a part of Fox Hollow's identity. A reminder that courage and love could turn the tide, even when the world seemed determined to crush you. They grew old together, their hands calloused and their faces lined, but their eyes still held the same fire that had burned that first night in the barn, when a wounded stranger had stumbled into her life and changed everything. They had fought for their land, for their love, for the right to build a future on their own terms. And they had won, not because it was easy, not because they were perfect, but because they had chosen each other every single day, through danger and doubt, and the long, slow work of building a life worth living. And in the end, that choice was the only one that mattered.